Hello, guys. Welcome to another episode of the Elsa Kurt Show. I'm Elsa Kurt, and today we've got a special guest. His name is Steve Friend. He is a former state and federal law enforcement officer, and he's the author of True Blue, My Journey from Beat Cop to FBI Whistleblower. You're not going to want to miss this show. Be back in a moment. Well, hey guys, and welcome, Steve. Thank you for joining me on the show today. I appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Elsa.
Absolutely. So not just any FBI whistleblower. We're talking about J6. We're talking about the protesters and your involvement in that. But before we get to that, I kind of want to take a little walk through your career, if you don't mind, because it's a pretty spectacular career. And from what I read, you really accomplished a hell of a lot in a relatively short period of time comparatively. So tell me a little bit, or tell us about your career, where you started and how you got to here.
Absolutely. And it was actually relevant to how things actually shook out, just kind of everything built on itself. I started as a police officer in Savannah, Georgia. Did that for a number of years before joining with the FBI in 2014. That was my end game. That was my NFL dream job, and was fortunate enough to get hired on. But with the law enforcement background, the Bureau typically feels more confident in sending new agents who have that, or military, something like that, to more remote locations. So they sent me to Sioux City, Iowa at the end of 2014 when I graduated from the academy. And I was tasked with investigating violent crimes that were occurring on Indian reservations in northeast Nebraska, 3 small tribes in that area. And essentially you work as a violent crimes detective for these reservations who are not equipped to charge crimes federally. But you also have a lot of call volume, a lot of cases, a lot of repetitions, and did that for 7 years, during which time I was able to open up about 200 cases, arrest about 150 violent criminals, and also served on the SWAT team for my division there, which was the Omaha division. And ultimately, though, elected to try to get closer to home in 2021. My wife and I both have parents in Savannah, so we wanted to be somewhere within the vicinity, and an opportunity was there for me to transfer to Daytona Beach, Florida. And I was happy to take that transfer, and took it with the understanding that I was going to be working on child pornography and human trafficking investigations in the area. So we moved over the summer of 2021, but a few months later, word came down that I was going to be reassigned to work on domestic terrorism and focusing on January 6 cases, and that those child pornography investigations were going to be just no longer resourced by the FBI. They're going to be considered a local matter going forward. So I was moved over to the Joint Terrorism Task Force in my office. And that was when I had my first exposure to January 6 cases, which to that point, I'd really just been focusing on other cases and hadn't had any access to them, and saw what was going on with those cases. And that led me to my ultimately decision to become a whistleblower.
Wow. I just, what an incredible career path, and such a difficult one. I mean, you definitely did not take the easy route there at all. You took on some really, really difficult things. And I'm sure that leaves a mark on you in so many ways. So, the debt of gratitude we all owe men and women like you, who are willing and able to take on such horrendous humans, really, and deal with that. So, first and foremost, I thank you for that incredible service and sacrifice that you've given. So that's just incredible to me. So that's the most important. Thank you so much for that. Now, how on earth did you make that shift? Because we're talking about, apples and oranges here, going from dealing with child molesters and predators to now J6 protesters. That's so different. How did you feel about that transition?
Well, I'm a team guy, so I went in with just I never worked child pornography cases either, and I thought, look, I'm going to be surrounded by people who have experience, and I will default to their judgment and their wisdom and ask dumb questions. I'm not afraid to ask dumb questions. When I originally looked into what was going on with the January 6th cases and saw that the FBI is departing so greatly from the domestic investigations operations guy that I knew very well in my time opening up all the cases that I had, just kind of had to be the innocent guy in the room saying, well, why are we doing it this way? And the answer that I got from my colleagues was pretty disturbing to me. And that was that the FBI's departure from the rules was to get buy-in from the field, which to me was very concerning, because it's not something that I was familiar to as a term. And what you have to understand is the way that the FBI is departing from its rules for January 6th is cases are typically in the FBI opened within a field office where the alleged incident or crime happens. So in theory, January 6th should be one case from Washington, D.C. with however many subjects that are attached to that case. But originally, the decision was made that they were going to open up a separate case for every single person. And instead of running it from Washington, D.C., on paper, they were going to disseminate all the cases around the country to all 56 field offices according to where the subject lived. Now, that is very unusual. It is allowed in the rules. But once that decision is made, the agents and the task force officers who are the case managers and the office where it's assigned have carte blanche to investigate that case as they see fit. But with January 6th, there was still this task force that was stood up in Washington, D.C. that was essentially handing out directives to the field on how to handle their own cases. And to me, it seemed like we were achieving something that could have been achieved by the book. So why were we doing it this way? Obviously, they could have opened up one case or lots of cases in D.C. and asked us to do things for them, which is very par for the course. It didn't make sense for an agent in Washington to fly to Florida to do an interview. He can just ask me. We have the same training. But if my name was on the paper as being the case agent and the guys in DC were actually telling me what to do, why was that happening? And it just became very apparent to me that the FBI made that decision for two reasons. One is to contribute to this statistical narrative that we've heard in this country for the last few years, that domestic terrorism is on the rise. And by making one case into a few thousand cases and spreading them around to all the offices around the country, you can now say, look, there's a huge uptick in domestic terrorism in Cleveland and in Sacramento and in Milwaukee and in El Paso. But all of those individuals are people who walked into the Capitol on January 6th. It's not like there's terror cells that are percolating around the country and planning attacks. So we're going to create that narrative. It's going to be something that we've seen that the president himself stand up and use as backing for the narrative of this rising threat in America. And secondarily, and probably more disturbing, and the reason I think that people can connect to this regardless of who you vote for, the FBI gets funding and its personnel are paid bonuses for meeting certain metrics. And this was a way for the senior executive service members to achieve metrics on domestic terrorism and receive very sizable compensation for meeting those metrics. And think of it as a traffic ticket quota. Do you really want to be paying civil servants for juking the stats?
Wow. Just hearing this alone, I'm pretty blown away. And we've been talking for quite some time now about essentially about the FBI and being essentially weaponized against the American people. And this seems like it couldn't be a clearer case of that. Your thought process as you are coming to understand these things. To state the obvious, you had to be surprised. You had to be a little disgusted. And I would imagine you would have to, you're a stand-up guy, so your instinct is to do right and to call things out when you see that they're wrong. Talk to me a little bit about that pushback when you started asking the questions.
Yes, I asked the questions, and I didn't ask them with any sort of political bend. I asked them honestly because I took on good faith that the work that had been done on those January 6 cases was righteous, and we were going to be bringing prosecutions against individuals who should be prosecuted. And I was concerned that, hey, we're breaking the rules. Could be exculpatory evidence, and we're going to lose at trial. And I don't want to lose. If this is a bad person, we need to prosecute them. And then I was also worried about the process that the FBI is using becoming a quasi punishment for individuals. Like I told you before, I was a SWAT team guy. I believe in SWAT. It's a very useful law enforcement tool. But we were using SWAT, or large scale arrest operations involving dozens of agents, to apprehend individuals who had told us we will cooperate. So the FBI can just make a phone call at that point, or work through an attorney to have somebody surrender. But instead, we were going through this rigmarole where I felt like we were essentially using an elephant gun to shoot a mouse. So I brought all those concerns forward, and I was met by I think the most disappointing thing to me was immediately there was a default to, well, you have a big career ahead of you, Steve. You have a really good reputation. Are you sure you want to go down this road? As opposed to, hey, Steve's got a really good reputation. He's probably got a really good future with us. Why don't we look at his concerns and either see if they're right and we can correct it, or if he's wrong, we can explain it. And either way, I'd go back to work. But instead, all the energy and attention and focus from my superiors, and subsequently from Congress and from the media, has been to just attack the whistleblower, attack the messenger on this, to me, which only can mean that the information I've brought forward is accurate. That's why I'm getting all the flack that I've gotten, and it's been very disappointing. I mean, obviously the FBI was the dream job for me. I intended to do that for the next decade and a half of my life, but ultimately, that was cut short when they elected to suspend my security clearance under some pretty dubious circumstances.
Wow. That had to have been so difficult to do, because they know where to hit you, right? This is your career, this is your livelihood, this is your dream. Are you sure you want to mess with that? I would imagine that you had to have gone home, and I know you're a husband and a father of two boys. Yes.
Yep, two young ones.
Yeah. And I mean, you're a family man, you have a family to take care of. How did that affect you as far as making that decision to go forward with this? I mean, I'm sure your wife was probably right on board, but that had to be some serious conversations of how we're going to navigate this, because that's life altering, right?
Correct. And I think that's really why the FBI chooses the route that it does with whistleblowers. It knows that so many people are under those pressures. I was fortunate, if you want to call it that, with the coronavirus vaccine mandate coming the prior year. My family elected to not vaccinate. And the pressures that we faced with that, my wife and I had a discussion, and we said there could be a time in the very near future where I might be out of a job. That might come to pass. So we had made arrangements financially in our lives to sort of build a war chest, so we were prepared for that. So I didn't have quite the pressure that I think others did, but ultimately, to me, and as I've said this before, I told to my wife, I said the answer here is simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. I took an oath, and I took that oath seriously. I swore to protect the Constitution and the country, to defend my fellow countrymen. I feel that the FBI is violating individuals' rights, and it's incumbent on me to do my job. My job at this point is to raise the alarm, to ring that bell, and that's also consistent with the training that I've gotten throughout my career. In the FBI Academy, they take you to the Holocaust Memorial Museum, they take you to the MLK Memorial, and the point of that trip is to really drive home the reality that those type of things, a genocide or civil rights abuses, can only happen if law enforcement becomes an apparatchik of an out of control state and essentially doesn't step up. And it might only take one person to do it, to say, hey guys, are we the bad ones here? And if I need to be that guy, then I'll be that guy. And I'm blessed to have a very patient and understanding wife, and she was on board from that decision. And we've just gone ahead with that, and faced the consequences of it, which have been difficult, but at the same time, I don't think in retrospect that I would have done anything different, because I've got 2 little boys, and at the end of the day, I want them to always do the right thing. I said, in our family, damn the consequences. We always do the right thing, because at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, and you lay your head down on that pillow at night, you have to know that that's what you did.
I love that. I love that. That's so amazing. And the biggest reason why I think your story and stories like yours are so important to share and get out there to as many people as possible, because this is what we need to do, and it does take someone like you to stand up and fight for what's right and do what's right, even when it's difficult. And what an amazing gift you give to your sons, that lesson in life, just incredible. Now, tell me a little bit about your peers, your FBI peers throughout this. I'm just curious if they were saying to your closest friends and coworkers were saying, "Hey, dude, don't do this. You're making a mistake," or were they behind you? What kind of response did you get from your equals?
I would compare it to going to a timeshare weekend with your friend. And at the end of the weekend, you got the free weekend and didn't take the bait on the timeshare, and your friend did. And he's upset with that timeshare salesman, but he's really mad at you. And I in the few weeks after I made that decision, it was just a very awkward work environment. Certainly, my supervisors on up the chain, I had meetings with them, and during which they expressed some pretty disturbing things about, where I saw myself in the future, and that they'd never seen conduct like mine, and I was a conspiracy theorist. And up until when I said, "Look, I have an oath to upkeep, and that's my job," they said I had not a duty to the Constitution, but a duty to the FBI itself. So I think the wheat got separated from the chaff pretty well from a management standpoint. And now in the fallout since my ultimate suspension and separation from the FBI, I've kept contact with a couple of people, but I've actually established more relationships with other whistleblowers or other suspended individuals, and heard their stories, which are very analogous to my own. And we've sort of come to the conclusion that it's very sad to us what's actually happened within the FBI. It's just a job to a lot of people, just a government job. I've told this story before that I felt like when I came forward, we just needed one guy. If one guy stood up and did it, there you would have that Captain America Endgame moment where you'd hear "on your left," and you look over there, and all these people came forward, and it didn't come to pass. And I'm very disappointed and disheartened by that. I understand that there's financial reasons, but at the same time, I never joined the FBI so I could retire from the FBI and collect a pension. I joined to do the job, and this is the job, so I did the job. I expect no less from the other people that took that oath. I think sadly, though, that the oath of office for too many people in federal law enforcement is similar to a Apple user agreement where you just click yes to get the goodies and never really think twice about the ramifications of that.
Yeah, you do see that a lot, unfortunately, sadly, and that's why it shouldn't. Here's the funny thing: it shouldn't be notable that you've done what you've done. You should be the rule, not the exception. And it's really a sad state of things when people like you come forward and do the right thing because it's right, and uphold the oath that they made because it's right. It shouldn't. It's sad to me. It shouldn't be the exception. It should be the norm. But hopefully, people like you will encourage others to do the same, and see that the value in doing that is so much greater overall, not just personally, but for the entire country, for everyone, for your families, for our children, everyone is so much better. Now, tell me a little bit. Let's talk about your book. Your book is called True Blue: My Journey from Beat Cop to FBI Whistleblower. At what point did you decide that I need to put this down? I need to document this. I need this to be out in the universe. When did you decide to do that? And walk me a little bit through that whole process, if you could.
Yes. Well, I've always had the goal to write a book at some point in my life. This came a little faster than I was anticipating. Being in law enforcement, you always hear that story, or somebody's going to have to write a book about this. And I knew that I'd had a lot of experiences in my life that were impactful on my growth in law enforcement, but also just for good stories to tell. So shortly after my suspension, so I was suspended in September, so about maybe a few weeks into October, I was approached by a publisher and said that they were interested in having my story. And I had never obviously written anything of that length before, and then they kind of said, "Well, we need you to write, 50,000 words." And I thought, well, is that double spaced? I don't know what that means. But I honestly, I sat down and, I've been busy with work for the last 13, 14 years in law enforcement. And now I was idle at home and really trying to crystallize my thoughts throughout it. And I don't think it came from within. I think it came from above, because in 30 days, I was able to put everything down on paper and tell the story of my background and the experiences that I had as a police officer and as an FBI agent, the good work that actually does get done on a daily basis, and then lead myself up to my experience as a whistleblower, not for any reason that's political in nature, but because I hope that folks will give it an honest reading and see that where my intentions are. The process itself is an FBI whistleblower is extremely frustrating. You bring concerns forward and you hope they will be taken seriously, right or wrong, and you'll just go back to work because I wanted to make the workplace better. That's it. But because you were so stifled, you ultimately, the pressure becomes to just disappear or to step forward and come out and speak publicly, which I chose the latter option, because I felt like this was information that needed to be in the hands of everybody, not just a select few who were going to met out where the story I had to tell fell. So I put it all down on paper. It helped to sort of get my thoughts together, and it's been a very good aid for me actually in having conversations with folks like yourself, even testifying for the subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government, which I did back in February, and it's something I'm very proud of. I'm hoping that people will just be fair with it and not say, "Hey, that guy's a radical MAGA. I'm never gonna read anything that he's written."
Yeah, they like to put you in a box. As soon as you go against the narrative, you get put in that box, right? You're automatically ultra MAGA, conspiracy theorist, tinfoil hat wearer, all of the things. Heaven forbid if they consider that there's a truth out there that they're completely oblivious of. And I'm glad that you brought light to all of that. It's just an incredible thing to have done, really, considering all of the impact that it has had and could have on your life. One more question about that. Speaking of impact and pushback, when you made it public that you were writing this book, or maybe it didn't happen until after you actually published, was there a reaction, a response from your former superiors from the FBI? Did you get any kind of, I don't want to say threats, but any flack for coming out with this book?
Not from the FBI. I actually obtained permission to speak to the media about the details of my whistleblower complaint. So that was not difficult because it was actually made public by Senator Johnson. But there's sort of a similar review process when it comes to publishing a manuscript or a book. But at the point where I made the decision to come forward, I felt like I'd suffered a lot of additional things that are not necessarily as public beyond me just being suspended. The FBI denied my ability to seek outside employment, which I made 2 requests. They've refused to give me my training documents, which I needed for outside employment as well. They released my medical information to the New York Times, and as well as made allegations that I was under disciplinary review for shooting a firearm in my backyard. So there was quite a bit of indignities, and I was not really willing to go through the rigmarole process. So I did send my manuscript to the FBI's pre-publication review office, but with the addendum that I intend to publish it, and there's not a whole lot that they can say to stop that from happening. I think that the other innuendo and suggestion that's been made was that my whole effort here is profit seeking. And that was a question to me in my testimony. And I said, hey, I wrote a book and I didn't get it in advance. I just wrote it. So there's no profit angle here. It was getting thoughts down on paper, and then hopefully a message out to as wide a public as I can reach, because I think that the information I have to share is relevant to everybody, regardless of who you pull the lever for on election day.
Wow. Yeah, just a side note for the publishing. You can always tell when somebody has no knowledge of the publishing world or the book writing world, because anyone who says that you're going to, profit greatly off of book proceeds has no idea what this world is like, because it ain't that, trust me. The lucky ones, sure. But generally speaking, yeah, this is not a get rich quick scheme, writing books.
Correct. I mean, I've come to call myself a world famous author, but that's just because it's on the internet. So I think that makes me worth it.
Listen, you earn that. You earn that title. Yeah, you go in, all of the things. You're a published author, you're a writer, all of the things. Out of curiosity, did it give you the bug to write more? Is there going to be more coming from Stephen Friend?
Well, I've actually done some extra writing on top of the book. I've written a number of op-eds that were published, as well as some white papers for the Center for Renewing America, where I'm currently a fellow. But as far as writing a book, I sort of noodled around in my head, maybe reaching out to other whistleblowers and having their experiences, or even just retired agents who we just call old school FBI, old school bureau, to tell the tales that they had, because it certainly, I joined the FBI, and because I'm a fan of the work that was done before, I recognized that I was standing on the shoulder of giants. So that is maybe sometime in the future, but hopefully this book is well received, and maybe I'll have some pressure then.
I love it. How do you feel about the FBI now? Just in general, does it leave a bad feeling for you, or are you able to kind of just isolate and say this was a bad group of people in an otherwise great organization?
I originally had that thought in mind, but I think as I've seen more and more abuses come forward, I've just kind of come around on the decision that it's an agency that's lost. It needs to be put it into maybe do transition. Consider it like it's we're going to transition into hospice. There needs to be, we're going to make it comfortable. We're going to scale back and sell the house and maybe put them in a timeshare or time in a townhouse and scale it back and get rid of a lot of the problems. But I think ultimately it needs to be rebooted and relaunched as maybe just an aid to local law enforcement, because certainly in my experience, there's nothing that a state and local detective can do that the FBI has some unique ability to do. And certainly those guys out in the field are grinding away, and they would benefit from just having maybe an augmentation to their workforce.
Incredible that this could also be a huge catalyst for that type of change, and it sounds like a very necessary one too. So Steve, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing all this with us, and for writing this book, and for being the stand-up guy that you are. Could you tell everyone where they could find your book? And if you're doing, I don't know if you're doing any speaking engagements or tours anywhere, but please plug away if you are. Let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah. So right now it's on Amazon, True Blue. It's also at Barnes & Noble. Hopefully I will be standing up in a site for it myself. But you can also check out the work that is being done by Center for Renewing America, where I am a fellow. That's americarenewing.com. And as well as in the social media, where I am at Real Steve Friend on Twitter.
Outstanding. Again, Steve, thank you so much for coming on the show. Guys, thank you so much for watching today. We'll see you in the very next episode. Take care. Hey, family, if you're looking for the perfect gift for the reader in your life, why not check out one of my books? They're all available on Amazon and most major online book retailers, as well as elsakurt.com.